After he slid a black Founder's card across the rooftop bar and told the woman who was not his wife, "Order the 82 Bordeaux. By tomorrow, half this city will belong to us." Graham Cole thought the night was going perfectly. 30 floors below, Elena Moreau Cole's phone lit up with a trust alert only 3 people in Manhattan could trigger. Founder access used at Halcyon Tower, East Terrace. Card assigned to spouse. Elena looked at the screen, then at the wedding ring on her hand, and understood 2 things at once. Her husband was cheating on her, and he had just used her family's private key to steal something much bigger than a marriage. Chapter 1. Elena did not cry. That was the first thing that surprised her. She had imagined this moment before. Not often. Not dramatically. Just in those quiet, ugly flashes women get when a husband becomes too polished with his lies, too practiced with his absences, too careful with the phone he used to leave face up on the kitchen counter. But she had always imagined grief first. Instead, what came was clarity. She stood alone in the private tasting room of Moreau House, the restaurant her family had owned for 34 years, and stared at the alert on her screen until the letters stopped looking electronic and started looking personal. Halcyon Tower, East Terrace. Spouse card. The East Terrace at Halcyon was not just expensive real estate. It was private trust property. Family restricted. Founder level. The kind of space that did not appear on commercial listings and was never offered to the public. The card Graham had just used gave him limited access through marriage. He was not supposed to take anyone there. He was definitely not supposed to take Victoria Dane there. Elena already knew the second name before the security feed loaded. The camera showed Graham first. Tailored midnight coat. Silver tie. A hand too relaxed for innocence. Then Victoria stepped into frame in a cream dress that moved like liquid under terrace light. Tall, polished, lethal. In the way ambitious women became when they confused appetite with intelligence. Victoria was not some random affair. She was a managing partner at Dane Mercer Capital. She was whispered about in deal rooms and photographed at every charity gala where rich men pretended their money had ethics. 3 months earlier, she had started circling Harbor Crescent, Graham's biggest development project, and the one deal he had become almost strangely obsessed with closing before year-end. Elena watched the footage again. Graham handed Victoria the card. Victoria smiled. He leaned in and kissed the side of her mouth like a man who thought the world had already been won. Then he said something the camera did not catch. Victoria laughed. Elena muted the video, although it had never had sound. The kitchen beyond the tasting room kept moving. Knives on wood. Pans lifted and set down. Someone in pastry calling for orange zest. The ordinary heartbeat of the restaurant continued without her. That steadied her. Moreau House had done that for her since childhood. It did not panic because one man was weak. It did not collapse because one marriage was false. It survived lunch service, snowstorms, tax audits, staff breakups, supply shortages, and one recession that nearly took the whole block down with it. It would survive Graham. Her phone vibrated again. A second alert. Unauthorized archive request submitted. Halcyon Tower private records floor. User credential linked to spouse access chain. Elena went very still. That was no longer dinner. That was theft. She crossed the room, closed the tasting room door, and locked it. Then she opened the old leather folder she kept in the bottom drawer of the sideboard. The folder was plain, worn, easy to miss. Inside were 3 things. The first was a handwritten note from her mother. The second was a small brass key. The third was a card with one name on it. Julian Archer. Her thumb hovered over the card for half a second. She had not called him in 7 months. Not because of any fight. Not because of distance. Their lives simply belonged to different kinds of crisis. He spent his in glass towers and closed legal rooms, unwinding family wars rich people wrapped in better language. She spent hers in kitchens, payroll meetings, and the very physical work of keeping one old institution alive with dignity. But Julian Archer was the only person outside the Moreau family who knew what Halcyon Tower actually was. Not a luxury building. Not really. Halcyon was the crown stone in the Moreau Heritage Trust. The public face was hospitality, boutique leases, event spaces. The real skeleton under it was older and far richer. Commercial blocks, riverfront parcels, land banks bought cheap decades before anyone understood what they would become. Most of Manhattan thought the Moreaus had one lovely old restaurant and a sentimental amount of property. That misunderstanding had made several men rich. Graham most of all. Elena picked up her phone and dialed Julian before she could change her mind. He answered on the second ring. Elena. No hello. No surprise. His voice was low, calm, and very awake for 10:20 on a Tuesday night. She looked once more at the security still of her husband and Victoria on the terrace. He found the wrong door, she said. Silence. Not confusion. Recognition. Julian asked only one question. How bad? She exhaled slowly through her nose. Spouse card use at Halcyon. East Terrace. Then an archive request on the private records floor. A second of silence. Then Julian's voice changed. Not louder, colder. Don't call Graham, don't freeze anything yet. I'm on my way. She should have felt relief. What she felt instead was something cleaner. Readiness. Elena ended the call, slid the old folder back into the drawer, and looked at her reflection in the dark window above the wine cabinet. 41 years old. Dark hair pinned back for service. Slim black blouse rolled to the elbow. No makeup beyond what she had put on before dinner rush. Her face was calm. Too calm, maybe, but not blank. Under the calm sat anger. Under anger sat humiliation. Under humiliation sat something older and more dangerous. Memory. Her mother Sabine used to say, the kitchen taught two kinds of women the same lesson. The first kind learned to shrink. The second kind learned heat. Elena had spent too many years believing she was the first. Tonight, for the first time in a long while, she understood she had been wrong. Chapter 2. The story Graham told about Elena in public was neat because men like Graham liked neat stories. He told people she was refined, grounded, old New York in the best sense. He said she ran a beloved restaurant in the village that had been in her family forever. He said it the way other men said their wives painted watercolors or collected old cookbooks. Fondly, lightly, diminishing her without sounding like he was doing it. At first Elena had corrected him. Not with anger. Just facts. Moreau House was not a hobby. It was a flagship property. It employed 52 people across kitchen, floor, events, and administration. It serviced private dinners for people who moved markets by noon and begged for tables after midnight. But by year 6 of marriage, she had stopped correcting him. Correcting Graham always required energy. Respect should not. She had met him 12 years earlier at a preservation fundraiser downtown. Graham Cole was not yet Graham Cole then. He was clever, hungry, handsome in the polished American way, and very good at talking to old money without looking intimidated by it. He asked her about the restaurant and actually listened to the answer. That had been rare enough to matter. She told him about her grandfather buying the first building in 1989, when the block was rough and everyone said he was insane. She told him about her mother expanding carefully, taking neighboring leases no one else wanted, converting storage floors into boutique event spaces, and quietly buying title positions on properties around the neighborhood whenever cash flow allowed. Graham smiled and said, "So your family cooks with one hand and buys the city with the other." She laughed. At the time, it sounded admiring. Years later, she would realize it had sounded interested. Alana's mother had seen him more clearly. Sabine Moreau liked Graham's manners and distrusted his speed. She once told Alana in the back office while checking invoices, "That man learns rooms too quickly. Men who do that are either born in them or trying to conquer them." Elena, in love and still soft enough to think caution was pessimism, had kissed her mother's cheek and told her she worried too much. Sabine had smiled sadly and said nothing. By the time Alana married Graham, her father Luke had mostly stepped back from operations. Sabine still controlled the deep trust structures. Most of the serious holdings remained layered under old LLCs and donor vehicles designed for privacy, tax protection, and survival. Alana knew enough to manage the restaurant group, and enough to understand the family was wealthier than outsiders guessed. She did not know everything. Sabine had been deliberate about that. You do not tell a young woman every door in the house at once, she used to say. You teach her which keys matter first. Then Sabine died. Pancreatic cancer. Fast. Cruel. Efficient. In the final month, when pain had sharpened her and stripped away everything unnecessary, she asked Alana to bring a folder from the office safe. Inside were maps of properties Alana thought she understood, and legal charts proving she had understood maybe 20%. The restaurant block was only the visible route. Moreau Heritage held title positions through shell entities, 11 commercial buildings, 3 riverfront parcels, a warehouse conversion site in Brooklyn. They also held strategic minority stakes in hospitality infrastructure assets that looked boring on paper, but generated obscene leverage in practice. Halcyon Tower was the jewel. Harbor Crescent was the sleeping giant. Alana remembered staring at the documents while the hospital machine beside her mother kept counting time in soft mechanical clicks. You told no one? She asked. Sabine smiled with one side of her mouth. Even dying, she looked like a woman who had never once mistaken silence for weakness. I told the lawyers I trust. I told the accountants I pay too well to betray me, and now I'm telling you. What about Graham? Sabine's eyes moved to Alana's wedding ring. What about him? The answer should have warned her more than it did. After Sabine's death, control of the trust transferred in stages. Some rights activated at once. Others remained dormant until formal review. There were lock clauses, emergency triggers, and family access protocols that felt excessive until one had lived long enough to see what money made people attempt. Alana signed what she understood, deferred what she did not. Moved through grief like a woman carrying plates through a crowded room, carefully, because dropping anything would make too much noise. Graham, for a while, had been wonderful. He handled the funeral logistics she could not bear. He stood beside Luke during the wake. He told everyone Elena was extraordinary. Then his company started to grow. Then his language changed. He began referring to Moreau assets as if proximity made them partly his. He asked increasingly detailed questions about property structures she could not answer. And he disguised those questions as marital curiosity, the way men disguise greed as partnership. He never saw the full trust map. Sabine had made sure of that. Still, he got enough. An introduction here, a dinner there, a bridge lender willing to take his call because he was Elena's husband. A quiet assumption in rooms that the Moreaus would never let him fail entirely. He built fast after that. Cole Urban Capital became Colecrest Development, then simply Colecrest, sleek and glossy, and permanently one press profile away from a magazine cover. Graham wore better suits, chose his words more carefully, began to treat Alana's opinions as charming background rather than usable thought. Harbor Crescent became his obsession in year 10. A waterfront redevelopment bid, mixed-use luxury towers, public plaza promises, boutique hotel licensing, splashy renderings. It was the kind of deal that turned a successful developer into a city-defining one. He said it would be his legacy. Alana remembered standing beside the kitchen pass one winter night while he walked through the plans on his tablet. Whose land options are backing Parcel 7? She had asked. Graham barely glanced up. Handled. That wasn't my question. He smiled without warmth. And this is why I married you. You think like an auditor wrapped in silk. At the time, she let it go. Now, standing in the tasting room with Julian on his way, and her husband's affair glowing quietly on her screen, Alana understood what Harbor Crescent had really been. Not legacy. Appetite. And maybe something worse, because Victoria Dane did not sleep with men for access to dinner. She slept with them for access to doors. The question was not whether Graham was betraying her. The question was what, exactly, he thought he was close enough to steal. Chapter 3. Julian Archer arrived at Morrow House at 11:03 in a dark overcoat and no visible hurry. He looked the way he always looked. Controlled. Expensive in a restrained way. Dark hair gone a little silver at the temples since Elena last saw him. A face too intelligent to qualify as merely handsome. The kind of man who entered rooms as if he had learned early that panic solved nothing and wasted oxygen besides. The hostess knew him by sight from old board dinners and private legal lunches upstairs. She started to speak. He gave one small nod, and she stepped aside. When he entered the tasting room, Elena was standing by the sideboard with 2 untouched glasses of wine between them. He looked at her first. Not the screen, not the folder on the table. Her. "Have you eaten?" he asked. Of course that was the first thing he said. Elena let out a breath that was almost a laugh. No. His mouth moved slightly. Not a smile exactly. Just relief that she could still answer like herself. "Good," he said. "Then you still have judgment." He took off his coat and laid it over the chair rather than sit in it. His movements were neat, deliberate. She had always noticed his hands. Long-fingered. Precise. Built for paper wars rather than physical ones, though nothing about him suggested fragility. Julian had once been the youngest partner in one of the city's most ruthless trusts and estates firms. Then he had left, built his own practice, and acquired a reputation for handling old money collapses, inheritance coups, and property disputes so ugly no family wanted them public. He was also, still legally, Victoria Dane's husband. That part had once amused Elena. Tonight it did not. She handed him the phone. He watched the terrace footage once and set the device down with disturbing care. No subtlety, he said. None. His eyes shifted to the second alert, the archive request. That was when real anger entered his face. It was not loud anger. Julian did not do loud. He did what cold men did when something personal finally crossed into professional territory. He became exact. "How long have you suspected the affair?" he asked. Elena thought about it honestly. "I knew there was someone. I wasn't sure who. I knew he was moving money badly. I knew Harbor Crescent made him frantic. I knew he had started speaking to me like I was part of the furniture in his life rather than the structure under it." Julian nodded once. "Victoria and I have been effectively separated for 9 months. Publicly we stayed intact because her fund was courting legacy capital and my name made old families less nervous." That last line held no self-pity. Just fact. "Did you know about Graham?" Elena asked. I knew she was lying. I did not know to whom. His gaze sharpened. I did know she had become unusually interested in dormant trust vehicles tied to hospitality real estate. Specifically yours. Elena went very still. Julian opened the folder he had brought and spread out a series of printed corporate charts across the table. Dane Mercer Capital, Harbor Crescent Holdings, East Lantern Ventures, 3 layered shell LLCs, 2 debt instruments, 1 bridge facility. At the bottom sat a parcel map Elena recognized with a small flash of nausea. "Parcel 7, she said. Julian looked at her. Yes. Harbor Crescent's renderings always centered Parcel 7. It connected the waterfront promenade to the hotel spine. Without it, the whole public-facing design collapsed into separate blocks with no clean luxury corridor. Elena knew why the map sickened her before Julian spoke the words. "Parcel 7 is controlled through East Lantern Holdings," he said. "East Lantern is 91% beneficially owned by Morrow Heritage." She shut her eyes once. Not from surprise. From confirmation. Graham had spent a year planning a development whose heart he did not own. "He knows?" she asked. "I don't think he knows the full chain," Julian said. "I think he knows enough to believe he can get it. Which is more dangerous. Fragments make greedy people imaginative." He slid another document toward her. It was a spousal consent packet. Unsigned. Prepared 3 weeks ago. hidden inside a routine refinancing folder for Cole Crest. Elena stared at it. He was going to put this in front of you as administrative cleanup, Julian said. If signed, it would waive challenge rights on certain interlocking collateral assumptions. It wouldn't transfer ownership outright, but it would let him represent to investors that marital objections had been cleared. And Victoria? Julian's jaw tightened. Victoria's fund has been preparing to step in as preferred equity partner once he secured the waiver. She likely believes that after divorce or separation, she can ride the deal into permanent access. Elena looked at the trust map. Then at the footage still paused on Graham's hand at Victoria's back. For one sharp moment, humiliation tried to rise, not because he had chosen someone else, because he had chosen to rob her while pretending intimacy still existed. That feeling passed quickly. What replaced it was cleaner. He didn't just cheat, she said. No, Julian replied. He tried to build his future on a property line he assumed his wife was too small to understand. Silence settled between them. In the kitchen outside, someone laughed. A dishwasher tray hit the rack with a metallic crash. Normal life continued while old lies came apart by inches. Julian reached into his folder again and drew out one final sheet. Emergency founder trigger. Moreau Heritage Internal Protocol. Clause 9. Elena read it twice. Unauthorized use of founder access family property for hostile transfer activity initiates conditional review and temporary preservation rights. Controlling beneficiary may freeze archives, suspend courtesy access, and force beneficial disclosure pending formal action. Sabine's handwriting marked the margin in blue ink. Quiet money survives loud men. Alana's throat tightened unexpectedly. Julian noticed the handwriting and said nothing about it. What happens if I trigger review tonight? She asked. Everything connected to founder-level access goes into preservation. Archive requests freeze. Courtesy cards die. But if Graham realizes too early, he may try to close a side agreement before we can recover the chain cleanly. And Victoria will destroy paper the second she feels heat. He leaned forward, forearms on the table, eyes on hers. What do you want, Alana? It was not a legal question. Not really. She thought about her father's hands stained with tomato and wine over decades of service, her mother's ledgers. The 52 employees who counted on Moreau House payroll landing on time, no matter what happened in the Cole penthouse. The way Graham had once called her restaurant small on a panel, and later borrowed its credit line to cover a cash squeeze he swore would be brief. Then she thought about the East Terrace. The archive request. Victoria's smile. She answered without hesitation. I want him awake when he realizes how little of his empire was ever actually his. Julian held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then he nodded. Good, he said. Because the cleanest way to do that is not to stop dinner. Her brows lifted. He tapped the terrace still on her phone. You let them believe the affair is the only thing exposed. You show up. Not alone. You sit beside them. You let panic do what subpoenas cannot. Graham will reach for acceleration. Victoria will reach for reassurance. We will learn which documents matter most by watching what they try to protect. You want to turn dinner into an audit. His expression finally softened by a fraction. I want to turn dinner into bait. Alana looked down at her black blouse, her service trousers, the practical shoes she wore when checking the line. Then she looked back up. When? Julian glanced at his watch. Tomorrow night. Same table line if I know Victoria. She never chooses a room without staging sightlines. Alana went to the sideboard and picked up the untouched wine. This is a terrible plan, she said. Julian accepted the glass. It's an excellent plan, he replied. It's simply going to be unpleasant. For the first time that night, Alana smiled. Small, sharp, real. Then, let's make it memorable. Chapter 4. The black silk dress still fit. Alana had not worn it in 3 years. It lived at the back of the closet in the apartment upstairs from Morrow House, behind practical coats and work jackets, and the quiet armor of a woman who spent more time managing vendor disputes than being looked at under chandelier light. She stepped into it slowly and watched the fabric settle over her frame like memory. Not of Graham, of herself. The dress had been cut for the woman she was before marriage, taught her to minimize every room she entered in order to make her husband's ego feel larger inside it. It drew a clean line over her shoulders and waist. Severe rather than soft. Elegant without asking permission. She pinned up her hair herself. Put on gold earrings that had belonged to Sabine. Chose no necklace. Nothing that looked like performance. Downstairs, Moreau House handed dinner service to her executive chef without protest. Her staff knew better than to ask direct questions when her eyes looked like that. At 7:30, Julian arrived. He wore a dark charcoal suit and a navy tie. His face was composed, but when Alana came down the stairs into the private side entrance, something in his expression shifted and then hid itself again. He was too well-mannered to stare, too honest not to react. "You look," he said, then stopped. Alana waited. "Like they should both be very nervous," he finished. That nearly made her laugh. Instead, she picked up her coat. "And you look," she said, glancing at the tie, "like a man filing for emotional arson. Professional hazard." They took one car uptown. The city moved outside in streaks of gold and wet glass. Neither of them filled the silence for the sake of filling it. They reviewed only what mattered. Graham's likely routes. Victoria's fun pressure points. The preservation paperwork Naomi Pierce would file the moment Elena gave the word. The expected seating layout at Solstice, the private rooftop restaurant inside Halcyon Tower. At 7:52, the elevator opened directly onto the terrace floor. Solstice glowed. Low amber light. Glass walls. A view that sold power to people who mistook altitude for worth. The east terrace sat just beyond the main room through a line of pivoting doors, all brass frames and dark river behind them. The hostess looked up, recognized Elena after half a second, then straightened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Cole was one thing. Miss Moreau was another. Some people in this building knew the difference. "Good evening," the hostess said carefully. "Good evening, Morris," Elena replied. The woman's eyes flicked briefly to Julian, then back to Elena. Understanding landed. "Your table is ready." Of course it was. Elena had arranged it that afternoon through one secure internal line Graham did not know existed. The table sat directly beside the one on the east terrace, not close enough to touch, close enough to destroy a lie. When they stepped out through the doors, Graham was already seated with Victoria. He did not see them at first. He was leaning in, smiling, in that expensive low way he used when he wanted women to feel selected. Victoria had one hand around a wine glass and the other resting near his cufflinks. Then her eyes shifted. She saw Elena. The color left her face first. Graham turned, following her line of sight, and for one unguarded second, Elena watched her husband lose every ounce of certainty in his body. He did not stand immediately. That was how shocked he was. His hand stayed on the table. His mouth parted. His face went white, then flushed dark under the terrace light. "Elena," he said. She gave him the same polite nod she might have given a distant acquaintance at a gala. "Graham." Then she looked at Victoria. "Victoria, you look beautiful." Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, then looked past Elena and saw Julian. That was worse. If Graham had looked caught, Victoria looked exposed, stripped. Her fingers tightened so hard around the stem of the wine glass, Elena thought for a second it might break. "Julian," she said faintly. He inclined his head. Nothing more. No scene. No raised voice. No spectacle. The quiet hurt them more. Elena let Maris pull out her chair. She sat. Julian took the seat opposite her. The table was set for two. Candles already lit. the river beyond the terrace black and shining. For a few extraordinary seconds, all four of them occupied the same pool of air, and nobody knew which script applied anymore. Elena opened her menu as if the evening remained entirely salvageable. "The lamb was excellent the last time I was here," she said to Julian. "But I may take the Dover sole." Julian looked at his menu. "The sole?" "Definitely." Graham stared at them both. "What is this?" he asked at last. Elena did not look up. "Dinner." Victoria found her voice first, though it came out thinner than she probably intended. "Elena, I think there's been some misunderstanding." Now Elena looked at her. Not coldly. That would have been too easy. She looked at her with calm interest, the way one might study an expensive object in a store window and decide whether it justified the price. "I'm sure there has," she said. Maris appeared beside them with the wine list. Elena accepted it, turned one page, and handed it to Julian. "The 82 Bordeaux seems popular tonight," she said lightly. Across the terrace, Graham's jaw tightened. Julian's eyes flicked once toward Graham's table and back to the list. "Then perhaps we should try the Barolo instead. I dislike repetition." Maris, to her credit, did not blink. "Excellent choice, sir." The sommelier arrived. The bottle opened. The first pour landed ruby dark in the candlelight. Graham stood then, chair scraping sharply against the stone. "Elena, a word." She lifted her glass and watched the wine catch light at the rim. "No." His face changed. Not anger yet. Panic disguised as offense. "This isn't the place." "On the contrary," Elena said. "You seemed quite comfortable choosing it." Victoria flinched. Julian sat silent, one hand lightly resting near his water glass, as if giving Elena the room she had earned. That steadiness at her side felt less like rescue than reinforcement. She noticed it. She hated that she noticed it. She was grateful anyway. Graham lowered his voice. "If you're trying to humiliate me," Alana set her glass down with soft precision. "Graham, if I were trying to humiliate you, I would have invited investors." That shut him up for exactly 3 seconds. Then Victoria leaned forward, recovery flickering in her eyes. She was bright. Alana would give her that. Some women dissolved in exposure. Victoria reorganized. "We're adults," Victoria said smoothly. "Whatever this is, I assume it can be handled privately." Julian finally spoke. "That would be more convincing if you hadn't requested trust archive access under a spouse-linked credential exactly 24 hours ago." Now Victoria actually went still. Graham turned to her sharply. She turned to him. There it was. The first crack. Neither of them had known exactly how much the other had already risked. Alana watched the realization pass between them like silent electricity. Then she smiled at Maris as the first course arrived. "Thank you." The service team moved with the disciplined blindness of people trained around power. Plates down, water refilled, no faces lifted too high. Yet Alana could feel the terrace listening. Not openly, but listening. Graham sat again, because standing had stopped helping. They began eating, not dramatically, actually eating. That was the part that unbalanced him most. Alana cut into her starter and asked Julian about a renovation case downtown. Julian answered. They spoke in low, even tones about facades, landmark restrictions, trust disclosures, and a nonprofit board chair who had once tried to hide $3 million in a charitable easement. At the next table, no one touched the bread. Victoria kept glancing at Julian, then at Elena, then at Graham's phone as if she expected a message to rescue her from consequences. Graham was no longer pretending romance. He was calculating. Elena knew that look. She had seen it at board lunches, construction hearings, and the one time a lender tried to renegotiate terms at the last minute. He was looking for the nearest version of control. He found it in anger. "What exactly do you think you know?" he asked Elena quietly. She dabbed her mouth with her napkin. "I know you booked dinner for 2 on private trust property using access that was never meant for strangers." I know your companion requested archive entry under credentials linked to my family. I know Harbor Crescent has made you reckless. And I know, she said, finally meeting his eyes fully, that men who believe access is ownership, eventually, embarrass themselves. A flush climbed his throat. Victoria turned to him too quickly. There was fear behind her polish now. Good. Julian took a slow sip of wine. Then he said, almost conversationally, "By the way, Victoria, my office received notice this afternoon that Dane Mercer's Preferred Equity Committee moved tomorrow's Harbor Crescent review up by 12 hours. That seems urgent." Victoria's fingers froze on the knife handle. Graham looked at her again. Second crack. Elena almost pitied them. Almost. So this was it. Not just an affair. Acceleration. They had planned to close something by tomorrow. No wonder Graham had chosen Halcyon. No wonder Victoria wanted archive access. Elena leaned back in her chair, the river wind lifting one loose strand of hair near her temple. "Please," she said softly, "don't let us keep you from celebrating. It would be a shame for all this staging to go to waste." No one spoke after that for a while. The main course arrived. Graham barely touched his. Victoria not at all. Across the terrace, Elena and Julian finished every plate. At 8:47, Graham's phone lit up. He looked down. His face changed. Elena knew that look too. Something had gone wrong. He rose abruptly. "Excuse me." This time she let him go. He stepped inside toward the interior corridor, already dialing. Victoria half rose after him, then stopped when Julian looked at her and said, not unkindly, "Sit down." Running in heels never improved a legal outcome. For the first time all night, Victoria's composure truly slipped. "What do you want?" she asked Elena. Elena folded her hands. "Tonight? Information. And tomorrow?" Elena's face became very still. Restitution. Graham did not return for 6 minutes. When he did, he looked like a man trying very hard to keep a building from collapsing while everyone around him insisted the walls still looked beautiful. "What did you do?" he asked Elena. "Naomi must have moved faster than expected." "Good." Elena tilted her head. "Did something break?" Elena asked. Graham stared at her as if he had forgotten what her face looked like when it held no softness for him. "My archive access was frozen," he said. "The title room locked me out. The overnight committee got a preservation notice." Julian set down his glass. "Then the system works." Victoria turned sharply. "What system?" Elena looked at her. "The one my mother built for men who confuse proximity with permission." Graham's jaw tightened. "Stop talking in riddles." "No." Elena folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate. "I'll make it simple. You used founder-level family property to stage an affair and access private trust records. That triggered a preservation review. Which means every courtesy privilege you ever had through me just died." For the first time that night, real fear moved across Graham's face. Not fear of scandal. Not even fear of divorce. This was the fear of a man realizing a door he treated like his own had never been his to open. Victoria spoke next, too fast. "Graham told me the access chain was clean." Alana's gaze slid to her. "Of course he did." Julian leaned back in his chair and watched them both with the stillness of a man who preferred people to expose themselves without help. Graham looked from Elena to Julian, and then back again. "This is marital access," he said. "You don't get to criminalize dinner." Elena almost smiled. "Dinner?" she repeated. "Graham, the second your companion requested archive access under a spouse credential, this stopped being adultery and became attempted asset interference." Victoria went pale. She looked at Graham now, really looked at him, and whatever she saw there did not help. "What exactly did you request?" she asked. Graham snapped. "Not now." Julian answered for him. "Likely parcel records, trust easements, or beneficial chain disclosure tied to Harbor Crescent, which means one of two things. Either he wanted to impress you with theft, or he promised you access to land he doesn't control. The wind off the river cut across the terrace. No one at Graham's table touched their food. Elena stood, not abruptly, not theatrically, just with the calm finality of a woman who had already finished the only part of the evening that mattered. Maris appeared as if summoned by instinct. "Will you be wanting dessert, Miss Moreau?" she asked. That name landed hard. Graham heard it. Victoria heard it. Several nearby tables heard it too. Elena reached for her coat. "No," she said. "I think the evening has already given us enough sweetness." Then she turned to Graham one last time. "By the way, Harbor Crescent should be very interesting tomorrow." Something flickered in his eyes. He knew. Not everything, but enough. Elena added, very gently, "You might want to stop calling it yours." She walked off the terrace with Julian beside her, and did not look back. Chapter 5. At 2:12 in the morning, the lights were still on in the old Moreau office above the restaurant. Elena sat at the wide oak desk her mother had used for 20 years, shoes off, silk dress hidden under a wool robe she found in the closet, and read the preservation documents Naomi Pierce had just couriered over. Naomi was short, exact, and terrifying in the efficient way only women who had won too many legal fights became terrifying. Her dark suit looked untouched by the hour. Her glasses sat low on her nose as she moved through paper with surgical speed. Clause 9 held exactly as drafted, Naomi said. Courtesy access died. Archive activity froze. We also got an automatic beneficial review on any property currently under active transfer pressure. Julian stood by the window with his tie loosened and his phone to his ear, feeding instructions to an associate in a voice so calm it made everyone else sound dramatic by comparison. Elena heard pieces. Yes, before market open. No, not negotiate. Secure. If they shred, we subpoena. Get title online at 7. Then he ended the call and turned back toward the room. Naomi slid one document across to Elena. Read this. It was a financing summary for Harbor Crescent. Elena went still halfway down page 2. He had done it. Not guessed at it. Done it. 47 internal transfers from a hospitality services shell, 3 disguised as consultant fees, 9 hidden under event infrastructure adjustments, the rest layered through vendor invoices tied to restaurant-adjacent entities. Money had been siphoned not only from Moreau House operational reserves, but from secondary property maintenance accounts Sabine had always treated like sacred ground. He skimmed from the restaurant's operational shells to fund his option positions, Alana said quietly. He thought he was taking from the kitchen, never realizing the kitchen was legally walled off from the real estate empire. Naomi nodded, and then represented the resulting debt chain as independently capitalized. Julian crossed the room and set another folder beside her hand. Victoria sent this 20 minutes ago, he said. Alana looked up. She wants a meeting. Of course she does. Naomi's mouth flattened. She wants indemnity. She can want many things, Alana said. Julian's eyes held hers. She also attached 3 exhibits before asking. 1 term sheet, 1 side letter, 1 draft spousal waiver packet. Alana opened the top file. Her stomach turned. There it was in black and white. Graham had been preparing to present her with a, quote, routine support acknowledgement after Harbor Crescent's press launch. If signed, it would have allowed investor counsel to treat Moreau-related objections as cleared. He would not have gained title outright, but he would have gained breathing room. In men like Graham, breathing room quickly became theft. At the bottom sat a note in Victoria's hand. He said she already agreed in principle. Elena looked at the line until the letters blurred, then sharpened again. He lied to her too, she said. Julian's face changed by 1 careful degree. Yes. Naomi did not sound impressed. She still conspired. Yes, Elena repeated. She did. The office door opened without a knock. Luke Moreau stepped in carrying a tray with 4 coffee cups balanced on it. He was 74 now. Silver-haired, broad through the shoulders in the way old kitchen men remained broad, even after they stopped lifting crates themselves. He wore a dark cardigan over a pressed shirt, and the same expression he used to wear before difficult inspections. Measured. Wakeful, not remotely surprised. Alana rose halfway from her chair. "Papa, you should be asleep." Luke set the tray down. "So should you." Then he looked at the documents spread over Sabine's desk and let out a breath through his nose. I wondered how long he would last. Silence. Alana stared at him. "You knew?" Luke met her eyes. "I knew your mother didn't trust him. That is not the same thing." He sat opposite her, hands around the coffee cup without drinking yet. "Sabine did not hide Clause 9 because she was dramatic," he said. "She hid it because she had seen too many polite thieves marry their way toward old foundations. She said one day a man would forget he was a guest and test a locked door." Julian glanced once at Naomi. Neither interrupted. Elena's voice lowered. "And you let me marry him anyway?" Luke's face tightened, not from anger, from age-old helplessness. "You were in love. Your mother was dying. And a father can warn his daughter, but if he tries to rule her after she is grown, he stops being a father and becomes another man with his hand on her life." He looked down once, then back up. "I hoped Graham would love you more than he loved climbing. I was wrong." The room went quiet. Elena looked at her father's hands. They were still nicked at the knuckles from decades of kitchen work, still stained faintly by red wine and old heat. These were the hands that built the first dining room, sanded the first bar, carried supply boxes when payroll was too tight to hire enough help. Graham once called them old world. He had never understood that old world hands were exactly why new money got to pretend it built itself. Luke pushed the fourth cup toward Julian. "What now?" he asked. Julian answered plainly. "At 7, Victoria comes in and trades whatever she can for survival. At 9, Harbor Crescent's emergency committee meets at Bellwether Bank. At 10:30, Colcrest planned to announce preferred equity alignment and preliminary title consolidation. We make sure none of that survives contact with truth." Luke looked at Alana. Again, only one question mattered. "What do you want?" She thought of her mother, of the trust, of the terrace, of Graham using her family's founder access to kiss another woman and steal at the same time. Then she answered, "I want him publicly alive when the ownership chain flips in front of him." Luke nodded once. "Good. Your mother would have approved." Victoria arrived at 7:06 wearing yesterday's makeup and an entirely different face. The polish was still there. The clothes were still perfect. But exhaustion had gotten under the edges. Her eyes were swollen at the lower lids. Her jaw was too tight. She looked like a woman who had spent the night discovering how much of her confidence had been collateralized by a man who lied professionally. Naomi led her into the office and shut the door behind her. Victoria took in the room in one sweep. Elena at Sabine's desk. Julian by the window. Naomi with a legal pad open. Luke sitting near the sideboard, saying nothing. That last detail hit her hardest. There was something uniquely unnerving about being judged by the patriarch of the family you tried to outmaneuver. Victoria sat only after Elena gestured once. "No preamble," Elena said. "Say what you came to say." Victoria inhaled. "Graham told me he had spousal alignment. He told me Moreau objections were sentimental, not legal. He told me Harbor Crescent was structurally his and that the remaining family entanglements were courtesy concerns." Naomi wrote nothing. She was waiting for the useful part. Victoria continued. "I knew he was married. I knew he was using me. I was also using him. So let's not waste time pretending moral innocence exists in this room." Luke made the tiniest sound in his throat. Not approval, not disapproval, just age hearing arrogance and filing it where it belonged. Victoria's gaze tightened. "But I did not know he was moving against dormant trust property he didn't control. If I'd known that, my fund would never have touched the deal." Julian spoke for the first time. "That isn't true. You would have touched it differently. Victoria looked at him. After a beat, she said, "Fine. I would have touched it better." At least, she was honest in pieces. Elena folded her hands. "What do you have?" Victoria slid a flash drive across the desk. Internal committee recordings. Side letters. Graham's personal guarantees. A recorded call from 3 nights ago, where he says he can get your signature by Friday, because, and I quote, "Elena signs what keeps the peace." For one fast second, anger flashed hot and personal through Elena. Then it cooled. Of course he said that. Of course he believed it. Victoria kept going. He also rerouted a second tranche through Crescent Hospitality Services because he was short on the bridge reserve. I flagged it. He said restaurant-adjacent cash was temporary and invisible. Luke's face hardened like stone. Naomi finally wrote something. Alana asked the only remaining question. "What do you want in return?" Victoria held her gaze. "Not mercy. I'm realistic. I want my fund ring-fenced from Graham personally. I want the record to show I withdrew once I knew. And I want one thing more." Alana waited. Victoria's voice dropped. "I want him to know I was the one who handed you the knife." That, finally, sounded human. Alana looked at the flash drive on Sabine's desk, then at the woman across from her who had entered her marriage like a polished blade and now sat there asking for procedural survival and 1 ounce of revenge. Not innocent, not blameless, still useful. "Fine," Alana said. "You'll get no protection from private embarrassment, but if your materials are clean and your withdrawal is immediate, Naomi will separate fund-level exposure from your personal cooperation where the facts allow it." Naomi gave one short nod, harsh but acceptable. Victoria exhaled. Julian said, "You'll also give sworn testimony before noon." She looked at him, almost weary now. "Of course I will." Then she stood. At the door, she paused. When she turned back to Elena, all the performance was gone. "I thought he was trying to marry upward through you," she said. "I didn't realize he was tunneling under the whole house." Alana's expression did not move. "Most thieves think foundations are decorative." Victoria left. The room stayed quiet for a moment after the door shut. Then Luke picked up his coffee at last. "Your mother would have hated her," he said. Elena looked down at the flash drive. "Yes," she said, "but she would have used her." Chapter 6. By 9:40, Bellwether Bank's 42nd floor was full of polished ruin. The Harbor Crescent Emergency Committee had been moved into the larger conference suite because too many people suddenly needed to be present. Lenders, title counsel, preferred equity representatives, 2 city advisors, 3 board members who looked like they regretted ever learning Graham Cole's name. The glass walls overlooked the river. The atmosphere overlooked nothing. Graham was already there when Elena arrived. He had changed suits since last night. Charcoal instead of midnight. Red tie instead of silver. The uniform of a man trying to project authority after panic had already wrinkled it from the inside. He looked up when the conference doors opened. Elena entered first in a cream wool coat over black, Luke on one side, Julian on the other, Naomi half a step behind with 2 document boxes and a hard leather brief in hand. Several people stood without meaning to. That was the first reversal, not because Elena demanded it, because old money had entered the room and everyone who actually understood the ownership map felt it in their bones before the paper said why. Graham's face changed. He had expected fury. He had expected pleading. He had maybe expected a private ultimatum. He had not expected witnesses. "Elena," he said tightly, "this is not your meeting." She took off her gloves 1 finger at a time. "No," she said. "It's my land." Silence cracked across the room. At the far end of the table, a senior lender from Bellwether blinked. The city advisor to his right actually stopped typing. Graham laughed once. It sounded wrong even to him. Enough. Naomi opened the first box. "Good," she said. "Then let's stop speaking informally." Victoria was already in the room, not beside Graham, across from him. She wore a navy suit, no jewelry except a watch, and the expression of a woman who had decided shame was less useful than timing. When Graham saw her seated on the opposite side beside Dane Mercer counsel, he went visibly still. Third crack. A bellwether executive cleared his throat. We are here to determine whether Harbor Crescent retains title sufficiency and financing viability after the preservation notice is received overnight. Alana sat. So did everyone else. Naomi placed a certified packet in the center of the table. Then begin with title sufficiency, she said. Parcel 7, Service Corridor C, Utility Easement East 9, and the air right bridge above the promenade spine remain under Morrow Heritage control. No sale, assignment, waiver, or spousal consent exists transferring beneficial challenge rights. We have certified chain here. She slid the packet to title counsel. Pages turned. Fast, then slower. Graham's hands flattened on the table. That's impossible. Julian answered before anyone else could. No. Impossible would be your financing working after this. The bellwether executive looked at Graham sharply. Mr. Cole, did you represent these parcels as functionally aligned? Graham's mouth tightened. Under expected marital waiver and pending trust harmonization. Elena cut in. There was no harmonization. There was hope that I would sign something I wasn't supposed to understand. No one in the room pretended not to hear that. Victoria's counsel then placed their own packet down. Dane Mercer is formally withdrawing from preferred equity participation, he said. We are also delivering internal records relevant to representations made by Cole Crest principal Graham Cole. Graham turned to Victoria with naked disbelief. She held his gaze. Did not flinch. Did not look sorry. You said she was decorative, Victoria said. That was expensive of you. The line landed like a blade. A city advisor murmured something under his breath. One of the board members went pale. The title attorney finally looked up from the packet in front of him. If these chains are accurate, parcel integration fails. The public promenade alignment fails. The hotel spine loses legal continuity. And without East 9, utility routing must be completely redesigned. Bellwether's executive turned to Graham again. Why was this not disclosed? Graham's composure broke there. Not fully, but enough. Because it was fixable, he snapped. Because marital alignment was expected. Because this family has hidden behind old paper and nostalgia while men like me actually build things. Luke spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet. It carried farther than Graham's had. Men like you build towers with borrowed money, he said. My wife bought that land when no one would walk there after dark. The room went still again. Graham looked at Luke like a child who had finally been addressed by the elder he spent years dismissing. Luke continued. You ate at our table. You used our names. You borrowed our patience. Then you tried to slide your hand into the till and call it vision. There was no defense against that, because it was true, and everyone present knew it. Naomi opened the second box. Next issue, she said. Diversion of funds from Morrow-affiliated entities through Crescent Hospitality Services and associated shells to support Cole Crest option obligations and bridge liquidity. Now the financial side of the room woke up fully. Packets moved. Phones appeared. An associate at the back nearly dropped her tablet. Bellwether's executive went cold. Mr. Cole, did you commingle misrepresented hospitality reserves into project support? Graham looked at Elena then. Not the bankers. Not the lawyers. Her. As if this still somehow belonged inside a marriage. You could stop this, he said. The desperation in his voice made several people look up at once. Elena felt something inside her go still. There it was. The final thing. Not apology. Not remorse. Need. He was not asking because he loved her. He was asking because he had finally realized she was load-bearing. She answered exactly once. No. The word entered the room like a locked door. Bellwether suspended the line within 4 minutes. The city advisor formally withdrew support pending legal review. Dane Mercer exited on record. 2 board members asked for separate counsel. A forensic accountant requested immediate preservation over Cole Crest internal ledgers. And title counsel, after one last check of the certified chain, confirmed that without Moreau Heritage consent, Harbor Crescent's current structure was functionally unclosable. In practical terms, the empire did not explode. It buckled. Which was worse. Explosions make martyrs. Buckling makes paperwork. Graham stood so abruptly his chair rolled back into the glass wall. This is vindictive. Alana rose more slowly. No raised voice. No shaking hand. No theatrics. Just truth sharpened by patience. Vindictive would have been destroying you in private and letting you lie in public for another 6 months, she said. This is correction. He stared at her. Years of underestimation were still visible in his face, even now. Even broken. Some part of him could not reconcile the woman who kept his peace with the one taking his city-facing dream apart in front of lenders. You needed me, he said. You and that restaurant. You think any of this survives without what I built around you? Elena almost pitied him for saying it aloud. Then she took the final packet from Naomi and placed it on the table in front of Bellwether. It was the beneficial disclosure map of Moreau Heritage. Not complete. Enough. Enough to show 11 buildings. 3 river parcels. The Halcyon Trust. The underlying maintenance corridor beneath Harbor Crescent, and the controlling signature line. Alana Moreau. Every eye in the room dropped to the paper, then rose to her. This was the true reversal. The one no affair ever could have delivered on its own. All those years Graham had treated her like the sentimental owner of one charming old restaurant. And all along she had been the quiet majority sitting beneath blocks of the city he tried to sell back to itself. His face emptied. She spoke softly. You thought you married a woman with a dining room. What you married was the family that owned your skyline. No one moved. No one even breathed properly. Graham looked down at the map again as if the lines might rearrange themselves out of mercy. They did not. Julian stepped beside Alana, not touching her, not crowding her, just standing there as if the world had finally corrected its own geometry. Bellwether adjourned the meeting, not dramatically, legally. And that was how Graham Cole lost Harbor Crescent. Not with sirens, not with handcuffs, not with a screaming match on a rooftop, with certified title, frozen money, and the woman he taught himself not to see. Chapter 7. The papers called it many things over the next 3 weeks. The Harbor Crescent collapse, the quiet wife reversal, the founder's card scandal. One particularly stupid business tabloid ran Harris of Heat and Steel, which made Luke laugh so hard he nearly spilled espresso over the breakfast invoices. Elena ignored all of it. What mattered happened off camera. Bellwether froze 2 more Coalcrest facilities after forensic review. The city suspended zoning consideration. The DA's office opened a fraud inquiry once Naomi handed over the fund diversion trail. 3 of Graham's partners resigned before the second week ended. 2 more began negotiating exits. By the time the first long-form magazine profile appeared, the phrase "Empire in Controlled Unwind" had already replaced his name in several circles. Graham called 23 times the first weekend. Elena answered none. He left voicemails that moved in stages. Anger, pleading, blame, fatigue, finally silence. On the 4th Monday after Harbor Crescent failed, he came to Morrow House in person. It was 11 in the morning. Lunch prep. Knife work underway. Steam on the line. A normal day, which was exactly why he looked so wrong standing in the doorway. The suit was still expensive. The face inside it was not the same. He had lost something richer than money. Not status exactly. Status can be rebuilt in men with enough appetite. He had lost inevitability. Diego, Elena's executive chef, appeared at the office door and said only, "He's here." Elena closed the supplier ledger, 5 minutes, she said. She met Graham on the sidewalk outside. Bleecker Street moved around them with total indifference. Delivery trucks. A woman with a stroller. 2 tourists arguing over directions. The city never stopped because a rich man had fallen out of love with his own reflection. Graham looked at the restaurant sign above her shoulder. Then at her. I didn't know, he said. Elena almost laughed at the poverty of that sentence. About what? He swallowed once. How much there was. How much was yours? At last. Not sorry I betrayed you. Not sorry I stole. Sorry I miscalculated the scale of the woman standing in front of me. Her face cooled another degree. That, she said, is the first honest thing you've said in months. He flinched. Good. There was no satisfaction in it. Only accuracy. I did love you, he said then, because men like Graham always reach for old language when current leverage fails. Alina looked at him for a long moment. Maybe he believed that. Maybe there had been a version of him, years ago, who did. It no longer mattered. No, she said quietly. You loved standing near anything that made you larger. Something in his face broke at that. Not loudly. Just enough. He looked older all at once. You've taken everything. Alina shook her head. No, I kept what was mine. Then she stepped back toward the restaurant door. Graham's voice followed her once. What happens to me now? She paused with one hand on the brass pull. For the first time, she answered without anger at all. What happens to everyone who mistakes access for ownership, she said. You find out what you are without borrowed rooms. She went inside. The kitchen heat wrapped around her at once. Diego slid a coffee toward her without asking. She took it, burned her tongue slightly on the first sip, kept drinking anyway. Service began at noon. By week 6, Alana had legally resumed her full name. Alana Moreau. She signed it on trust papers first, then on payroll, then on a publisher agreement she had been too distracted to revisit for months, a private project she had once nearly abandoned, a book about family kitchens, property, appetite, and the strange architecture of inheritance. Not a memoir exactly, more dangerous than that. Naomi told her it was a terrible commercial title. Julian, reading the first pages one late evening in the office after everyone else had gone home, looked up and said, It's the right title. Terrible things are often right. She kept the title. Julian became part of the rhythm without either of them announcing it. He was there when Luke met contractors about reopening the upstairs event floor. There when the forensic reports came in. There on 3 separate Tuesday nights when Elena stayed too late over ledgers and forgot to eat anything that wasn't a slice of fennel sausage from the line. He never intruded, never assumed, never reached for intimacy as payment for loyalty. He knocked on office doors that legally belonged to her. He asked before entering private rooms even when no one else was around. He listened when she talked about Sabine, and when he talked about his own marriage ending, he did so without self-pity and without using Elena as proof that he had chosen better. That restraint was dangerous. Far more dangerous than pursuit. One rainy Thursday after close, they ended up alone in the tasting room, with the city blurred beyond the glass, and a bottle of Nebbiolo opened because Luke said both of them looked underfed and left one on the table with suspicious timing. Elena sat barefoot on the window bench, shoes abandoned under the chair. Julian loosened his cuffs and read through a contractor memo while she marked revisions on menu costs. It was quiet, warm, ordinary in a way she had almost forgotten adulthood could be. At some point she looked up and realized he was watching her. Not hungrily, not absently, attentively. What? She asked. You laugh differently now. The line caught her off guard. She set down her pen. Do I? Yes. He closed the memo. It used to sound like something you gave rooms. Now it sounds like something that belongs to you. She did not answer immediately, because he was right. Because she had noticed it herself one afternoon, when Luke burned a batch of garlic out of stubbornness and blamed the pan like a teenager. Because the sound that came out of her had surprised her by being real. Julian's voice lowered. He took too much while you were trying to keep the peace. The old pain in that truth still existed, but it no longer owned the room inside her. Alana looked down at the gold earring lying on the windowsill, where she had removed it absent-mindedly. My mother used to say peace without respect is just expensive silence. Julian considered that. She sounds terrifying. Alana smiled. She was. Then, after a beat, you would have liked her. A softer quiet followed. It stretched just long enough to become noticeable, not awkward. Charged. Julian rose from his chair and crossed to the bench, stopping near enough that she could smell rain on his coat and cedar beneath it. He did not touch her. Elena, he said, and her name in his mouth had become something dangerously precise over the weeks. May I ask you something without turning it into a legal matter? The old version of her might have stepped back from that edge. This one only lifted her eyes to his. Try. His mouth moved slightly. Would you have dinner with me? He asked. Somewhere with no fraud, no trust maps, and no one trying to steal your waterfront? That made her laugh. The real laugh. The one he had named. It eased something in his face just hearing it. Elena looked at him for a second longer. Then she said, yes. Simple. Not dramatic. Entirely enough. For the first time since Sabine's funeral, the future did not feel like something she had to defend alone. Chapter 8. 6 months after the night on the East Terrace, Halcyon reopened the top floor under a different name. Not for private vanity dinners. Not for affair staging. Not for men who wanted to feel tall against glass. Elena converted the old terrace level into the Morrow Foundation Room and announced a culinary apprenticeship and preservation program for first-generation family businesses, trying to keep hold of property in neighborhoods that wanted them priced out. Reporters called it strategic philanthropy. They were not wrong. They were not right enough either. It was inheritance used properly. Heat turned outward. Sabine would have approved. Harbor Crescent did not become Graham's Towers. Without Parcel 7, without East 9, without the Promenade Spine. His version died. Elena and Luke, working with a smaller development group and one very stubborn urban planner, redesigned the site as a mixed public market, food hall, training kitchens, and moderate-income housing with the riverfront left genuinely open. When the new renderings were shown to the city, one council member who had once publicly flattered Graham muttered, "This is better." It was. That was the point. Graham eventually sold what remained of Cole Crest in pieces. Not penniless, not jailed, at least not yet. Just reduced. The city moved on. It always did. Men like him hated that most. On a cold October evening, exactly 1 year after the Founder's Card Alert first lit Elena's phone, she stood on the rebuilt East Terrace in a black coat with her hands around a cup of coffee and looked out at the river. The wind was sharper this year, cleaner somehow. Behind her, inside the glass, apprentices in white jackets were finishing a foundation dinner. Luke was pretending not to supervise and absolutely supervising. Diego was shouting about timing. Naomi had already bullied 3 donors into doubling their pledges. The room was alive. Julian stepped out onto the terrace carrying a second cup. He stood beside her, shoulder near shoulder, not touching until she leaned first. "Buzzy in there," he said. "Always." He handed her the second cup. She took it, though she was already holding one. He noticed, did not comment. That restraint again. Below them, the city glittered in hard lines and soft mistakes. Towers, windows, sirens, somewhere far off. The whole living machine. Alona thought about the woman she had been 12 months earlier. Standing in the tasting room, phone in hand, marriage cracking open, and something bigger hidden under it. At the time, betrayal had felt like the event. Now she understood it had only been the alarm. The real story was older. A woman forgetting her own weight, then remembering it all at once. Julian looked out over the river and said quietly, "Do you ever wish he had never forced the door?" Alana considered the question honestly. If Graham had stayed only unfaithful and not greedy, the marriage might have lasted longer. More years of polite absence, more careful diminishment, more expensive silence. The thought made her chest go cold. No, she said. I wish my mother had lived. I wish I had seen him sooner. But no, I don't wish the door had stayed closed. Julian turned slightly toward her. Why not? She looked at the room beyond the glass. At Luke. At the apprentices. At the old tower reclaimed for use instead of vanity. At her own reflection layered faintly over the city. Because then I might have spent the rest of my life thinking survival was enough. His eyes held hers. And that was it. The lesson under everything. Not that a man cheated, not even that a man stole, that women could become so skilled at carrying peace for others, that they forgot peace had never been the same thing as freedom. Alana had remembered. Late, but fully. She set one coffee down on the ledge and slipped her hand into Julian's. He looked at their joined hands once, then back at her face. No triumph, no claim, just that same dangerous steadiness. Good, he said softly. You were built for more than survival. She smiled. Below them, the city kept moving. Above it, on the terrace where her marriage had effectively died, and her life had started telling the truth, Alana Moreau stood in her own name, on her own land, beside a man who understood that strength did not need taming, and love did not need theft. A broken marriage was not the end of a woman's story. Sometimes it was only the moment the foundation spoke. Subscribe for more high-stakes modern drama stories.
Thanks for watching.